I decided to make a Pong game in every programming language. Starters, I wanted to make a 4-player Pong game in Scratch. I mean, this is one of the 3 languages that I guess I know, the other 2 being Python and C++. Let's see what I got in this one. Spoiler, I made a totally not a 4-player Pong. Now, if you don't know, Scratch is a programming language built out of blocks and aimed for kids. This makes it a perfect choice when picking an easy language to start with. I started off by making a blank project and deleting a default sprite that also is a Scratch's mascot. Pretty easy so far. Now, for the harder part, choosing what sprites I want to use in the game. I could draw them myself, but nah, I could just use built-in ones. So I picked the ball, and that was the point when I actually felt sort of bad for just reusing someone's work. And I mean, I wanted to do it from scratch, in Scratch. And I just drew the paddle myself. Now, all that's left was just to make the rest of the game. Making a bouncy ball was pretty straightforward. And done. Changing a direction just a little, and now we made a bouncing screensaver. This was almost enough to make a single-player version of the Pong. I just needed to add a white line that, when touched, would result in the game over screen or condition. Why white? Because of white background, which I didn't and still don't feel like changing, and apparently you cannot make a sprite invisible and still have it interacting with other objects. Now that the game can be lost on one side, I added 3 more game over lines on all sides of the screen. Because remember, I was making a 4-player Pong game. After that, I added few things that would make the ball act more like an actual Pong. And that being starting from one of the players and going in slightly random direction every time. Ball movement done, game over condition done. Am I missing something? Alright, the players. Now, their logic was not too complicated. Just making them come back to the same place every time we restart, adding 2 conditions that check if we pressed A or D for movement. Now, here's where things start to get pretty bad. You see, the paddle was going off the screen, and I didn't find anything better at the point rather than to make paddles bounce off edges of the screen. Spoiler, this will be fixed later. For the next part, I decided to figure out the collision between paddle and the ball. Adding a simple condition that checks if the ball touches the paddle and turns seemed to work, but the ball would sometimes bounce off the paddle 2 or even 3 times in a row, always changing direction. Solution? Checking which direction the ball was coming from and rotating it accordingly. Well, that was half of the solution. The other half was to add a delay before it could bounce off again. The only issue was that I didn't know how timer worked in Scratch.
5 minutes later.
Now it does not bounce off multiple times in a row. And with that, the single-player Pong could be played.
Yay!
Now onto making it a 4-player game, or at least that's what I thought at the time. Since I had the code for 1 player, I could just duplicate it 3 times, right? Right? Well, when drawing player sprite, I made it at the bottom of the screen, so the rotation was pretty messed up. After fixing that and aligning players where they were supposed to be, I was done. No, just kidding, that was terrible. And the ball was not bouncing off 3 new paddles, so I just had to add collision to them. Well, no, that didn't exactly work. The ball was bouncing off in the wrong direction on all paddles except the original one. The solution was really simple, but I didn't know it yet. With that, I decided to end my struggles that day. Finally, that idiot noticed that each platform should have its own collision angle calculation. That gave me this monstrosity, which also solved the collision issues. The next problem was collision between wall and paddles, and you know what? Turns out using bounce everywhere is not such a good idea after all. What's a good idea? I don't know. But the working way was to add few checks on paddle's position and allow or disallow movement in a direction. Doing that for all 4 paddles. And I ended up with this result. I also updated controls, and now left and right paddles were both controlled by J and L. At that point, I gave up on the idea of 4 players. I mean, you could play this version with 2 players already, but what I noticed is that was also a hardcore version of Pong if you try to play it all by yourself. How hardcore exactly? Well, something like 4 times more hardcore than the original. The only thing that was missing to make it an actual hardcore game was adding the score system. At least that part didn't cause any issues. I mean, it's just making 2 variables, high score and this current game score, and just tying them up to ball's action. And ta-da! And that's how I made a not a 4-player Pong game in Scratch. It's pretty hardcore, I would say not much easier than the Flappy Bird. Stay tuned for Python version. Oh, and let me know what you think about it and if I should post it somewhere. See ya!